I swear I have never hated my sister more than I did in that moment. We stood in our grandmother's old living room. The same one with the creaky wooden floors and that hideous green wallpaper she had refused to replace for over 50 years. The house smelled exactly as I remembered. A mix of old books and lavender, like time itself had stood still. But everything had changed. Claire stood across from me, arms crossed, chin raised in that infuriating way she always did when she wanted to rub something in my face. "I sold it," she said, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. I blinked, the words not quite registering. "What do you mean you sold it?" She sighed dramatically like I was a child too slow to keep up. "Grandma's house. It's gone. The new owners move in next week." My stomach dropped. It felt like the ground had been ripped from under me. "You can't do that." We agreed. "We were going to figure this out together." Claire smirked, tilting her head slightly, savoring the moment. "No, you assumed we'd do this together. But Grandma left me as the executor of the will. I decided to sell." She leaned in closer, her voice a whisper laced with mock sympathy. "And by the way, you're not getting a single cent." I felt my fists clench at my sides. This wasn't just a house. It was our history, our childhood. It was where we spent summers making cookies in the too-small kitchen, while Grandma told us stories of the old days. It was where I stayed when I had nowhere else to go after my divorce. It was the one place in the world that had ever felt like home. And Claire had sold it, without even telling me. She shrugged, utterly indifferent to my pain. It was an old dump anyway. I could use the money. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She could use the money? That's what this was about? She rolled her eyes, seeing the look on my face. "Oh, don't act so shocked. You know Grandma always loved me more." That was it. I turned and walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. Because at that moment I knew one thing for sure, Claire had won. Or at least she thought she had. For weeks I tried to move on. I told myself it was just a house, walls and a roof, nothing more. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the betrayal. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Claire's smug expression, heard her voice dripping with satisfaction. "You'll never see a dime of that money." She had won. She had taken everything. And the worst part? She didn't care. While I was drowning in grief, struggling to come to terms with the loss, Claire was parading around on social media, posting pictures of expensive shopping sprees, luxury vacations and fancy dinners, all funded by the sale of our grandmother's house. It made me sick. She had destroyed the one place that had ever felt like home, and she was celebrating like she had won the lottery. Then one night my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. For a second I considered ignoring it, but some deep instinct told me to pick up. "Hello." A pause. Then a man's voice. Is this?" He said my name hesitantly. "Yeah. Who's this?" "My name's Mark. I just bought your grandmother's house." I sat up straight. My heart pounded in my chest. "Okay. I know this is kinda weird, but I found something in the attic, and I think you might want to come over." I frowned. "What is it?" Another pause. Then his voice dropped slightly, like he wasn't sure how to say it. "I think it changes everything." A chill ran down my spine. I didn't even hesitate. Within minutes I was in my car, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My heart hammered against my ribs as I sped through the empty streets, my mind racing. What could he have found? When I pulled up in front of my grandmother's house, no, not mine anymore, I barely recognized it. The porch light was on, casting long shadows across the driveway, but the windows were dark and empty. It looked hollow. Mark was waiting for me by the front door. He was in his mid-40s, tall, wearing an old baseball cap. He gave me a nod. "I wasn't sure if I should call you," he admitted as we stepped inside. "But once I found it, I figured you'd want to see." "Found what?" I asked, my breath shallow. He didn't answer. Instead, he led me through the house, past the empty rooms that once held my childhood memories, and up the narrow staircase to the attic. The pull-down ladder creaked under our weight as we climbed. The attic smelled of dust and time, filled with forgotten furniture and old boxes. Mark walked straight to the far corner, where an old trunk sat half covered by a moth-eaten blanket. The lid was already open. Inside, wrapped in layers of yellowed cloth, was an envelope. Thick, heavy, Mark handed it to me. Go ahead, he said. I took a deep breath and tore it open. And the moment I saw what was inside, my blood ran cold. My fingers trembled as I pulled the stack of aged documents from the envelope. The paper was brittle, yellowed with time, edges curling as if trying to protect the secrets hidden within. My breath caught in my throat as I unfolded the first sheet. It was a legal document, handwritten, signed, and stamped with an official seal. My eyes scanned the words, my pulse pounding louder with every line. Last will and testament of Eleanor Holloway. My grandmother's name. I swallowed hard. This couldn't be right. The will Claire had used, the one she had presented to the lawyers, had been typed, modern, indisputable. But this was different. It was dated 20 years earlier, and scrawled in my grandmother's own shaky handwriting. I forced myself to read. And then the world tilted beneath me. She had left the house to me. Not to Claire. Not to be sold. Not to be erased from existence. To me. I stumbled back, my vision blurring. My mind raced, trying to piece together what this meant. My grandmother had chosen me. She had wanted me to have the house, to keep it in the family, to preserve the memories we had built there. So why hadn't I known about this? Why had Claire been the one to take everything? I gripped the edge of the attic trunk, struggling to steady my breath. I don't understand. I whispered, my voice hoarse. Mark cleared his throat. There's more, he said. I looked up. He was holding another paper. This one a letter, folded so many times the creases had almost worn through. He handed it to me, and I hesitated before unfolding it. The second I saw the familiar handwriting, my chest tightened. It was a letter from my grandmother. My eyes darted across the page, devouring the words. My dear, if you're reading this, then something has gone terribly wrong. I never wanted you to lose this house. It is yours and always has been. But I fear that Claire will do anything to take it from you. She has always resented what we had here. She doesn't see the love, the history, only the money. I have hidden this will away, hoping that one day the truth will be found. Please don't let her win. With all my love. Grandmother. My knees buckled. I collapsed onto the attic floor, the letter clutched in my hands. The weight of betrayal pressed down on my chest. Claire had known. She had known about this will and had made sure it was never found. She had lied, manipulated, and stolen what was rightfully mine. My fists clenched. Are you okay? Mark asked hesitantly. I shook my head, wiping away the tears of rage and heartbreak stinging my eyes. No, he whispered. But I will be. I wasn't going to let this go. I had lost too much already. Claire had stolen my inheritance, my home, my grandmother's final wishes. But now I had proof. Now I had everything I needed to fight back. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not anymore. The weight of the letter still pressed against my palm as I stormed down the grand staircase. The house, once a sanctuary of childhood laughter and warm embraces, now loomed around me like a silent witness to betrayal. Shadows stretched across the marble floor, flickering under the dim chandelier light. My heart pounded like a war drum, my pulse thrumming with a single thought. Claire had stolen everything from me, and I was going to make her pay. I reached the study, the room where my grandmother had spent countless hours writing letters, reading by the fireplace. The same room where Claire had no doubt plotted her deception. My hands slammed against the heavy wooden doors, throwing them open with a force that made Claire jolt in her seat. She looked up from her glass of wine, annoyance flashing across her sharp features. Well, aren't you dramatic? She sighed, swirling the deep red liquid. What now, dear sister? I didn't bother with words. Instead, I tossed the letter onto the polished mahogany desk. It fluttered for a moment before landing right in front of her. Claire's smirk wavered. What's this? She asked, but there was something in her voice, something almost nervous. You tell me. My voice was ice. She picked up the letter, her manicured fingers tightening around the edges as she read. I watched her expression shift, from mild amusement to disbelief, then to something much darker. That's impossible, she muttered. The will was. She cut herself off, clamping her mouth shut. My lips curled into a mirthless smile. The will was what, Claire? Destroyed? Hidden away so no one would ever find it? So you could take everything for yourself. Claire slammed the letter down, Standing so quickly her chair screeched against the floor. This doesn't change anything, she hissed. You have no proof that this is legally binding. The courts have already ruled in my favor. What are you going to do? March in there and wave some dusty old papers around. I took a slow step forward, my voice deadly calm. I don't need to. You just admitted to everything. The color drained from her face. I recorded it. I cut in, lifting my phone, the screen still glowing. Every word. Every lie. Every single thing you just confessed. Her eyes darted to the door, panic creeping into her expression. You won't get away with this, she spat. I have connections, lawyers. And I have the truth, I shot back. Let's see how far your lies take you when the world knows what you've done. For the first time, Claire Holloway looked afraid. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't dared to in years. Power. This wasn't over. But I was no longer the one running. The storm outside raged like a beast unleashed, wind howling through the towering oaks that lined the Holloway estate. Lightning flashed, illuminating the once pristine mansion, now nothing more than a house of lies. I stood in the grand hall, my breath shallow, my hands clenched into fists. The weight of the truth pressed against my chest, suffocating, unbearable. And then footsteps. Slow. Calculated. The sound of someone who knew they had already won. Claire emerged from the shadows, her silk robe flowing behind her like a queen preparing for battle. But this wasn't a throne room, and she wasn't royalty. She was a thief, a liar, and most of all, a murderer. You've been busy, she mused, her voice smooth as ever, though I caught the slight tremor beneath it. Digging up old ghosts. Unlocking doors that should have stayed closed. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to stay calm. I know everything, Claire. She tilted her head, feigning curiosity. Do you? I know you forged the will. I know you manipulated Mason into signing over his shares before he disappeared. And I know, I took a step closer, my voice steady, that Diana's accident wasn't an accident at all. Silence. Then laughter. Soft at first, then growing twisted, mocking. Claire crossed the room, picking up a crystal decanter from the bar. She poured herself a drink, swirling the amber liquid before taking a slow sip. You always were the sentimental one, she said, setting the glass down with a deliberate clink. Always so desperate to believe in fairness, in justice. She leaned in slightly, her eyes gleaming. But the world doesn't work that way, dear sister. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. It will this time. Her smirk faltered. I reached into my coat pocket, pulling out the envelope, the one thing she hadn't been able to destroy. The missing document. The real will. The one that changed everything. Her face drained of color. Where did you get that? Does it matter? I whispered, stepping closer, the paper trembling in my grip. It's over, Claire. For the first time I saw fear flicker in her eyes. Then a crash. Before I could react, Claire lunged. The glass from her drink shattered as she knocked the envelope from my hands, sending papers flying. I scrambled, but she was fast, too fast. A sharp pain bloomed in my ribs as she shoved me backward. I hit the ground hard. The wind was knocked from my lungs. Claire towered over me, breathing heavily, her hands shaking. You think this changes anything? She hissed. Do you really think anyone will believe you? I gritted my teeth. They won't have to. And then from the shadows, a voice. You're wrong about that, Claire. She stiffened. Because standing at the doorway, eyes burning with fury, was Mason. And he had heard everything. The air in the Holloway estate was thick with tension, the kind that made every breath feel like a battle. The storm outside mirrored the chaos within, lightning slashing through the night sky, illuminating the room where everything would finally come undone. Claire stood frozen, her eyes darting between me and Mason. The confidence she had carried just moments ago drained from her face, replaced by something raw fear. Real, undeniable fear. Mason took a step forward, his voice cold and sharp. You set me up. Claire's hands trembled slightly, but she forced a laugh, dry, brittle. Mason, don't be ridiculous. He ignored her. His eyes burned into mine, searching for confirmation. I nodded. That was all he needed. You framed me, Mason said, his voice rising, the rage barely contained. You used me to take the fall for something I didn't do. His fists clenched at his sides. And you almost got away with it. Claire's mask cracked. You have no proof, she snapped. I lifted my phone. Actually, we do. Her face went white. I hit play. Her voice filled the room. A confession caught in the heat of her arrogance, her belief that she had already won. You think anyone will believe you? Her recorded voice sneered. The world doesn't work that way. The color drained from Claire's face as the words echoed back at her, sealing her fate. No, she whispered. Then louder, more desperate. No. She lunged at me, at the phone, at anything that could undo what had just been done. But Mason was faster. His hand caught her wrist in midair, stopping her cold. Enough. She thrashed against his grip, wild now, a cornered animal. You don't understand, Mason. I had no choice. He shoved her back, disgust flashing across his face. You always had a choice. Claire stumbled, her breath ragged. Then something shifted. A slow, bitter smile curled her lips. And so did you, she whispered. A chill crawled down my spine. Claire's gaze flickered to something behind us. Before I could react, she bolted. Mason and I spun around just in time to see her disappear through the open door, her silhouette vanishing into the raging storm. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Mason exhaled, long and heavy. She's not going to stop. I nodded. Then we won't either. The storm howled louder outside, but inside, the real storm had only just begun. The storm had swallowed the night, thunder roaring like a beast unleashed. Rain lashed against the Holloway estate, drumming against the windows as if demanding to be let in. But inside, the real storm was unfolding. Mason and I raced through the dimly lit corridors, the echoes of our footsteps lost in the chaos. Claire was ahead of us, her shadow flickering in and out of sight as she wove through the maze-like halls with the desperation of a fugitive. She knows this house better than we do, Mason muttered, his jaw tight. Doesn't matter. I shot back, adrenaline burning through my veins. She's running out of places to hide. A door slammed somewhere in the distance. We turned the corner just in time to see Claire vanish into the grand library. Mason didn't hesitate. He threw his weight against the heavy oak doors, bursting inside. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, towering shelves casting deep, shifting shadows under the flickering chandelier. But the room was empty. Or so it seemed. She's here, I whispered. I could feel it. The air was too still, too heavy with the weight of something unseen. Mason scanned the room, his breathing slow, measured. Check the shelves, he murmured. There might be. A sudden movement. Before I could react, Claire lunged from the darkness, something glinting in her hand. A blade. Mason barely dodged in time. The knife slashed through the air where his throat had been just seconds ago. Claire's eyes were wild now, the polished, calculating woman gone. This was desperation in its rawest form. You think you've won? She hissed, circling us like a predator. You think you can stop me? You're out of options, Claire, I said, voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. Her laugh was sharp, fractured. There's always an option. Lightning struck outside, flooding the room with white-hot light. And in that split second, Claire moved. She bolted for the bookshelf, her hands flying over the spines as if searching for something. And then, with a sickening lurch, the entire shelf swung open. A secret passage. Mason cursed under his breath. But we were already moving. Claire disappeared into the darkness, and we followed without hesitation. The passage was narrow, the walls damp with age. The air smelled of earth and time, of secrets buried beneath layers of dust and deceit. She's leading us somewhere, Mason murmured, eyes sharp. Or she's cornering herself, I countered. The tunnel twisted and turned, spiraling downward until the flickering light ahead told us we had reached the end. Claire stood there, her back against the cold stone wall, her chest heaving. The knife dangled in her hand, useless now. There was nowhere left to run. Mason stepped forward. It's over, Claire. And for the first time that night, she looked like she believed it. The night had not yet surrendered to the dawn, and the Holloway estate lay cloaked in an uneasy silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind a thick, suffocating fog that curled around the towering mansion like ghostly fingers. But inside, the true storm had only begun. Mason stood rigid in the grand hall, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Across from him, Claire Holloway, the woman who had orchestrated the game of shadows, who had manipulated, deceived, and murdered. now faced her reckoning. The flickering chandelier overhead cast eerie shapes along the marble floors, each shadow stretching and twisting like the past catching up to her. "You never understood, did you?" Claire's voice was steady, but there was something else beneath it. An edge of something crumbling, something desperate. This was never about power or revenge. It was survival. Mason scoffed. "Survival? You call this survival?" He took a step closer, his gaze dark with restrained fury. "You played with lives, Claire. You tore families apart, you—" "I did what I had to do," she snapped, her control fracturing. "You think I wanted this? That I wanted to be trapped in a house of ghosts and secrets, forced to keep the legacy alive?" Her breath came fast and shallow. "You don't know what it's like, Mason, to be born into a curse." Amanda, standing at the threshold, watched the scene unfold with a sinking feeling in her gut. Claire's words, as twisted as they were, rang with a truth she hadn't expected. This house, this family, everything about the Holloways reeked of something sinister that had been passed down like an heirloom. And now it was unraveling at last. Mason's jaw tightened. "Your family's sins don't justify your own." Claire's lips curled into something resembling a smirk. "Then why are you here, Mason? Why are you chasing the very thing you claim to condemn?" The words hung in the air like a loaded gun. Mason knew what she was doing, trying to shake his resolve, trying to plant doubt where there was none. But he wouldn't waver. The air in the room shifted. Claire must have sensed it too, because her eyes darted to the grand staircase, then back to Mason. A decision formed in her mind, one last move. And then she ran. The moment her feet left the ground, Mason was after her. She vaulted up the stairs two at a time, the long train of her black dress billowing behind her like the wings of a raven. He was gaining, but Claire had always been faster. Always one step ahead. She reached the third-floor landing, darting into a room shrouded in dust and time. Mason was there a heartbeat later, slamming the door open just as Claire skidded to a halt in front of an ornate armoire. She reached into the shadows, fingers closing around something cold and metallic. A gun. Mason didn't have time to think. He lunged. The gun fired. A deafening crack split the air. The force of the bullet sent with splinters flying from the doorframe, missing Mason's shoulder by mere inches. He tackled Claire before she could fire again, the gun clattering to the floor as they crashed onto the carpet in a tangle of limbs. "Enough!" His voice was raw, his grip unyielding as he pinned her down. "It's over, Claire." She struggled beneath him, eyes burning with something close to madness, but there was no escaping now. The weight of her own sins had finally caught up to her. Amanda appeared at the doorway, breathless. "Mason." But Mason already knew. It was done. Claire Holloway had lost the game. And the shadows that had ruled this house for generations would finally be laid to rest. Claire was in prison. That was supposed to be the end of it all, but for me the victory wasn't complete. I didn't want to just watch her serve her sentence. I wanted to make sure that when Claire walked out of prison she had nothing. No money. No power. No way back. Claire had always had a special ability to maneuver and survive. She could lie, manipulate, and con the world if she had to. But this time I would write the ending. I thought about Amanda, Claire's closest accomplice. She was the one who hid Claire's money, the one who held the secret accounts, the one who held what was left of Claire's fraudulent empire. If Amanda was still free, Claire still had hope. But I wouldn't let that happen. I sent a detailed report to the police, including all the evidence of Amanda's involvement. I had text messages between her and Claire, suspicious bank transactions, a confession Claire had accidentally let slip when I was setting her up. It was all set. And then, just as I predicted, Amanda was caught. It didn't take long for her to realize she couldn't get away with this. When questioned by the police, Amanda did what scammers like Claire never thought their partners would do. She betrayed them. Amanda spilled the beans. Not just about what Claire had done to me, but about other scams, fake loans, illegal transactions, even a phony investment scheme Claire had run years before. The police had everything they needed. Claire's second trial was a snap. Her original sentence was doubled. There was no escape, no escape. Claire sat there, pale, her eyes filled with despair as the judge read out her sentence. As for me, I left the courthouse with a sense of relief. Claire had taken everything from me. Her house, our precious memories, our trust. But now she had nothing left. I returned to her house where I had restored every corner, where I had relived the best memories of my life. I walked into the kitchen, smelling the scent of cookies and lavender, the scent of my childhood. Outside the prison bars, Claire could write as many letters of forgiveness as she wanted, but I would not read them, because in the end justice had been served, and I had truly won.